What's going on, guys? This is going to be our Summary of Markets Week 42, and we're also going to go over our options and watches as well. Bear with me, I'm a little sick. My throat's pretty sore, so it might be a little bad during the video, but we're going to get through it. So, looking at SPY, we talked about last week how you had like a 1 hour bulldog forming, and you were starting to break out, but as I said, I've been saying this for I think like 2 or 3 videos now, that I thought 362, somewhere around that 362 range, was going to be a trap. And we saw that play out perfectly this week. So we saw the bulldog that we talked about, pretty much perfect bulldog, bottom, curve back, bottom, pop up. Didn't really get the pullback, but still the same kind of mentality, and then popped up, and you kind of hit that pivot, which was right around 362, right around that level that I told you guys it was most likely going to be a bull trap. And we see that 362, 363 level kind of topped us out, and then we started to push lower. We had a little bit of news involved in this as well, but there's just so much news it's really hard to cover all of it. But then we saw a little bit of a bottom come in, 1 hour pivot starting to form around 355, and now you're putting in kind of another bulldog. You have that bottom being put in, popping up, kind of failing the 50 moving average, putting in that curved back, and now it looks like we are retesting that pivot. So moving into tomorrow, without seeing how we open in the next few hours, 3 hours until the ES opens, without seeing how we open, I'm going to guess that we're probably going to see a gap up. There have been just good news after good news after good news all weekend long, all vaccine news for the most part. A lot of drugs getting approved for emergency use. You have Pfizer and Moderna trying to get their drugs approved within the next few days, next week tops. They're saying they could have vaccines already coming out in the first week of December. So there's just tons of vaccine news coming out that you would assume would be very bullish. So if we're going to kind of predict what's going to happen here, I'm going to guess that this is going to turn into a bulldog, probably gap up to around 357, and then start to push higher around that 362 level again. It could even gap higher than that, but I'm going to assume it's probably going to be bullish, and you're going to want to keep a bullish bias moving forward. So kind of looking at this current level that we're seeing, it looked like it was starting to get a little bearish. You're kind of breaking that bulldog to the downside. But I think this is a little bit of a fake out, and I'm going to guess that we're going to gap back inside the triangle or even above the triangle once that market opens. If I'm wrong and we don't gap up, keep an eye on these lower levels, kind of around 350, 349 as your support. So this was a gap. It pretty much was filled, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. But the OTS trail is pretty much right around that same level, around 350. So if the vaccine news isn't enough to pump us here, and this break of this triangle is accurate, then we probably will come down to 350, and then maybe even 343 later in the week. But that would be a pretty nasty sell-off. So I don't think it's going to get that low. Worst case scenario, I think 350 is going to be tested. But I truly think this news is going to be too bullish. I think we're going to gap up or even push higher. So once we get back above like 360, I would start looking at 364 to 370 as your targets. Talking about technicals outside of the fundamentals, we saw massive flow coming into the 370s, the 370 calls. December 4th, I believe, or it was December 4th or December 14th. I believe it was the 4th. 370 calls were getting hundreds of thousands of volume. And it was getting so much volume that even during the sell-off on the end of the day, those contracts were going up because somebody was buying all of those contracts. So somebody is putting millions of dollars on those 370 calls for early December. I assume they're betting on the vaccines getting released and people being able to get vaccines early December because that's basically what the news lines up with. So I assume they're betting on that. Not only that, we saw a $1 billion with a B, $1 billion block trade on SPY come in above market price on Friday. So somebody is putting a lot of money on this vaccine news. So I would probably not try to bet against this vaccine news. Yeah, if you were taking any bearish positions, I would take them as hedges, not as a overall bearish portfolio. Unless like VIX started to climb very rapidly, maybe the vaccine news gets delayed. You have to have some bad news to kind of help your bearish bias, because there is just a constant barrage of good news coming out right now. So be very careful if you are leaning bearish. Moving on to gold. Gold is just slowly dying without that stimulus news that we talked about. So until you get stimulus news, gold is probably just going to keep bleeding out, downtrending down into the 1800s. So if you want to accumulate gold on the way down, probably not a bad idea. You probably will get some stimulus within the first few months of Biden's presidency, or even if Trump somehow gets reelected. Very, very slim chance. But even if he gets reelected, I think you'll still get a stimulus within the first quarter of 2021. So if you want a dollar cost average into gold, anticipating a stimulus, I don't think that's a bad idea, but just understand that it's probably going to bleed out until that stimulus gets released. Moving on to oil. Oil, excuse me, my throat's killing me. Moving on to oil, I told you guys last week that below $43, above 33, there's just really, it's just a volatile range. There's no clear direction. It's just a very long, volatile range until you find value above that level. So it looks like we are slowly trying to push above 43. It looks like it wants to kind of push above this high. We haven't seen a higher than 44 price for the past like 6 months. So if it does break this price here, it will be putting in a very big high. So keep an eye on that. You do break above like 44, oil will be quite bullish. But until then, this could be a fake out and you're just going to continue that range. So I would not be too bullish on oil until 44, 43 is taken. Moving on to Bitcoin, I told you guys that it started to fake out around that 16.3 level, and you shouldn't be bullish until you found value back above that 16.3 level. Well, look at what happened. You hit the fake out level, came back down to the 100% fib, and then you destroyed that fake out level above 16.3. So if you bought that breakout above 16.3, you were looking very, very good. You had no drawdown. The targets above you at 17.3, 17.6, 18.7, 1900, they were all taken, okay? And now look at what price is doing. You're topping out around that 1.13 fake out level. So that's that secondary fake out range once you hit those targets. And it looks like it is currently doing its job. Price is faking out. But yet again, if we do break above that fake out level, above 19,000, 20,300 is very likely. Okay, I think that is an all-time high. 20,300, I believe it is. Let me see. What is the all-time high? The all-time high, yeah. So the all-time high is right around 20,000. So if you do break out into that that level, you most likely will be putting in a new all-time high. So keep an eye on $19,040. If you break that, find value, you should be getting that 20,300 on that next breakout. If you do pull back, you already kind of did, but if you do pull back, watch these targets. They'll act as support, which they did, around 17.6, 17.3. Anything deeper than that, back to the fake out level around 16.3. Okay. Moving on to Ethereum, I told you guys the same thing. Back above that fake out level, above 482, you would be getting very bullish. So you broke that fake out level. Your targets were 518, 530. You hit those with ease. Next levels were 568, 580, and you hit those with ease. So once again, once you faked out on those levels, your pullback support would have been around 530, 518. That support is already coming in. So now if we re-break that 580, very likely we'll see 630 as your next target. But you have to find some value back above that 580. So in the meantime, if you didn't buy that dip, you're basically just waiting for that breakout. But all right, that is the summary of markets. Keep an eye on those levels. We are going to move on to the options watch list. So moving on here, a couple things that I'm watching. We were in a net trade. I went ahead and closed that trade for a small profit because you are putting in a little bit of a bearish rising wedge here. If you do start to break this wedge to the downside, you could look for some shorts, but I would be a little careful. Net is a typically very bullish chart, so shorting this for very long is not advised. But you do look like you want to be bearish for the short term. If you don't break this wedge within the next day or two, you probably will fall down towards that $60 range. So just keep an eye on that. Next up, Palantir is a big name for our group. A lot of people are in this. They're buying dips and they're buying breakouts and they're accumulating shares. It's just a very bullish chart. Now, I told people that I'm not interested in buying shares until it reclaims, or retests, I should say, the 8 moving average around $16.90. So that's basically what I'm watching. The ADMA, if we do go lower, probably around that $16 little gap that we put in. If it does want to break out higher, you probably don't want to take this until you get above like 19. Do we have any pivots above us? Let's take a look. So we're failing a 4-hour pivot here. We have a 4-hour auto SR. If we start to break that auto SR around $19, that's probably where you'll start to get bullish again. But until then, I would probably be keeping an eye on the lower levels to buy the dip. I would not be paying attention to the breakout. Moving on, we called out a trade on Peloton. Where's that chart? It was this one here. Peloton had a very bearish channel. I talked about how you were breaking that channel. It looked like you wanted to climb higher into the 110s, and then above 110, you look very good to go into that gap fill at 125. So we did break the channel. 110 has been hit. Inverse head and shoulders looks like it's breaking out to the upside. The next pullback is very important. If the next pullback is bullish, where we don't pull back very deeply and it gets bought up immediately, I would be keeping an eye on that 122, 123 gap fill target. But until then, be a little careful because you are coming into a little bit of resistance. But if you do hold above 110, you should be filling that gap. So keep an eye on Peloton. Moving on to AMD. AMD is putting in a daily bulldog. You are breaking out of that bulldog bullishly, but you did pull back kind of right after breaking out, so it's a little sketchy. The trade that I would take based on AMD would be if the pullback holds, you would buy the pullback, stop loss kind of below the bulldog head, and then you would be targeting the bulldog targets around 96 to 98. You could have a little short-term targets kind of around 88 to 90, but that would not give you a very good risk reward. But that would be a level in which you would get out if it does find a lot of resistance. All right, moving on to Walmart. I called out Walmart last week. Looked really good. You had good earnings. You started to climb. We're kind of consolidating here. It's putting in somewhat of a giraffe where you have that kind of a bulldog, but you have a very long neck, and then we're putting in the head way up here. So if you do hold this support here and you break out higher, this would be a bulldog type of a trade. So you would be looking for... It's actually hitting your local targets here. But your next targets would be around 158 and 160. So if you do break this bulldog head, keep an eye on that upper zone around 160 as your target. Sorry, I do apologize. I am sick right now. It's a little hard to make these videos. Starbucks, I'm actually not watching currently for a trade, but if it does start to break out around 98.50, should go higher. We were watching Baba. Baba above 260 looks really good. You did break right off that pivot. You started to climb higher. Watch for the next consolidation on Baba since we are breaking kind of a bear flag. The next consolidation, if you are bullish, you stay above kind of like 260, 265. You should be heading into that 288 gap fill. So keep an eye on the next consolidation on Baba. DraftKings, we were looking at a trade, but it hit our target. I told you guys right down here when it tested 38 that it was going to get, or I think it was this test here, it was going to get 50 by the end of the week. Those calls were 10 cents. They closed at over $1, I believe. So very, very good gain on those. But now that our target is hit around $50, it's probably going to come back and retest that kind of $45 range around that trend. Couple more things we're watching here. Snapchat, I was in a trade. We took 40% or 35% profit on this trade. I didn't want to hold this over the weekend because our target was 45, so we were right around that target. But this does look like it can go higher. So if you do break this high and put in an all-time high, keep an eye on a momentum trade on Snapchat here. You should be going into 49 or 50 for the breakout. Teladoc was another trade that we were in. I closed 66% of my shares for an 8% profit. Very, very good profit on shares. It was one of our biggest positions, so took a nice gain on that. It does have a little bit of a target left moving into 206, so keep an eye on that 206 target. Any pullback on Teladoc that looks bullish, I am going to reaccumulate my shares. I'm looking to accumulate Teladoc for probably the next month or two, and my overall target is around that 250 to 240 range. Pinterest, I have been accumulating shares on Pinterest. We're up like 5 or 6% already on my shares. We're holding a very, very strong uptrend, but it is starting to break. So if this starts to pull back on Monday, kind of below like 65.50-ish, I'm probably going to let go of my shares for a profit. We're currently up 5%, so we have a little bit of a buffer. I think my average is somewhere around 63. So if you start to fail like that 65 area, I'm probably going to let go of my shares for a profit. But keep an eye on Pinterest. I think it's going to do very well in the next few weeks if you do get some volume. This was kind of a dog shit penny stock that we found on our scanner that I took because it looked really good. I only bought 100 shares, so we're not taking a massive position in this. But I'm risking about $1 to make $1.85 on this. So if this Bulldog breakout is accurate, we should be getting around $9 to $10 on the move up. So keep an eye on that. I've been accumulating NEO shares as well. We're up like, I think 4% or 3% on our NEO shares. I'm looking for a kind of a breakout into the $50, $52 range, and I'll probably start to take profit on the way up. It looked a little scary on Friday. We're getting a little bit of sell pressure, but if you do start to break around like $50, this should be going at least to 52. So keep an eye on that. I don't know if you would buy options up here. It's a little extended for options. But shares is what I'm trading currently. Rocket is another one that I'm accumulating shares on. We're also in a diagonal for this, so we're making premium short term. We're up like 60% on our premium already. I'm looking to accumulate more shares as we approach $20. So if we do continue lower, I'm going to pick up some more shares, maybe for an inverse head and shoulders. And then if you break around $22, I'm going to accumulate even more shares. So my overall target on Rocket would be a gap fill around 31 to 32, and I'm going to accumulate shares all the way down to probably like $18. These other ones I'm not really watching anymore. Let's take a quick look at tech. I'm not really looking at tech right now. I think the rotation is kind of coming out of tech currently. Yeah, Microsoft doesn't look too good. Okay, so Apple is one that I am watching. You do have a bulldog here as well as a triangle. So if we do start to break this bulldog around 120, 121, you probably will get around 130. So keep an eye on the bulldog. If you do start to consolidate, you could accumulate some shares down to around like 110. Then you would be looking for a breakout to around 130. Facebook, I'm not really looking at a trade on Facebook. You do have a little bit of an uptrend here that could be tested. So keep an eye on that uptrend. You are kind of in like a little bilateral triangle right now. So if you test that uptrend, you could look to play shares or options into that 280, 290 range. Netflix is starting to perk up, so keep an eye on Netflix. You do have a little bit of a increase in momentum here, kind of an inverse head and shoulders. Keep an eye on 500 to 510. Netflix really likes to fill its gaps, and you have a little bit of a gap here, and then you have a gap around here as well. So I would lean bullish on Netflix. Amazon, no real trade, but you are getting very tight on this triangle here, so most likely going to find a breakout pretty soon. Tesla, we called out that trade. This was the biggest trade ever called out in Discord. We called out that trade at 75 cents a contract. They topped out at, what was it, like $58 a contract for a 7,700% gain. Largest trade ever called out in Discord. Funny enough, the top 3 trades we've ever called out were all Teslatos. So it seems like Teslatos are pretty good trades. But you are currently topping out an all-time high, so until you break that all-time high with strong value, I would not be bullish on Tesla. It looks like you are extended. You want to pull back towards that 458 range. So that's most likely what you will do. Now, because their options are so volatile, you don't have to trade options. People forget you can just buy shares. I think accumulating shares above like 450 is pretty safe. So any pullback here, accumulating shares for the breakout would be a lot safer than trading the options. So keep an eye on that. But all right, guys, that is the summary markets and the options watch list. Appreciate you guys watching. Make sure to like the video if you liked the video, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for our live trading session. Peace out, guys.